This lesson is in regards to the classic Maya portion of your readings and lessons for Unit 3 in the course. The reading in your textbook for this section begins in Chapter 9, titled The Terminal Formative. You're looking for your pages on early Maya centers. It starts about 235 if you have the second edition, or 240 if you have the more recent edition. Then move on to Chapter 11, the Maya in the early classic. This emphasizes the Maya at their height of organization, technically as an urban state, and gives you quite a bit of extra information on a variety of sites and so forth. In particular, how the sites were laid out. This corresponds with the video viewing in Canvas on Palenque, which is highlighting engineering abilities, water management, and so forth. And then your textbook moves on from 11 into Chapter 12 on the Classic Maya. Again, you're looking for late Classic Maya culture there and Maya of the Southern Lowlands. A particularly courtly life at the height of the late Classic, and information in specific to the site of Palenque, Tikal, and so forth. Here you have a quick map. The light green indicated area is showing you the southern Maya lowlands. Outside of that brighter green area is the northern part of the Yucatan Peninsula. That is not densely populated until after the Classic period is over. The two sites that I've mentioned there, probably the two that are the most well known by the public. Palenque, which is in the modern day state of Chiapas, and Tikal, which is in the northern Petén portion of the nation of Guatemala. You can see just below Tikal is Lake Chichén Itzá. You can also see in this area that while it rains a lot, there's not a lot of water on the surface, and that's something that's going to play a role with some of your other exploration in this unit on managing water, managing agricultural resources, and so forth. This is the densest continuously occupied area during the Classic period that we know of, with huge populations, but not huge in any one particular urban environment or capital city. Each of one then would be surrounded by towns, villages, and other remote areas. Previously in the lesson, you've been taking a look at the Central Highlands for Teotihuacan. You can see it'll be up quite a bit further north in the area that's whiter or ashy looking there, and then a little bit closer down south, but again closer to the Pacific coast, Monte Alban in the modern day nation of Oaxaca. Monte Alban, again, capital of the Zapotec culture during the Classic period. This is a little bit older map, does not show all the sites that we know, but gives you sort of a start. You are working on map locations for this unit, and as you can see, as you look at this a little bit more carefully, or find one online that you can use or something in your textbook, that when possible, we have a buildup of classic Maya sites along rivers like the Usumacinta, where we see Piedras Negras, Yaxchilan, Bonampak with the murals, the Pasión River, which goes a little bit further in, where we have a whole bunch of closely located sites, which eventually all go to war and wipe each other's out at the end of the Classic period. And then coming down the Rio Hondo and Belize rivers from the west there, again, a number of fairly large sites. Right in the middle of all of it is Tikal, and a few others that are in that particular location. And these, because they're in the center of the trade and transportation area for the Classic period, tend to be the most dynamic, the largest, and have the most relationships with other cultures such as Teotihuacan. This map also shows you the region known as Rio Bec. Again, not as well understood archaeologically, but does have a very distinct regional architectural style. And then up towards the north, but not something that is really dynamic during the Classic period, is the area called the Puk, which means hills. They're not very large hills, but there's a little bit of undulation going through that particular area. Now, on this particular slide, again, just laying out a little bit of the general layout of some very large classic Maya sites. There are thousands, and no map can really fit all of them on there. But again, you can see several that are mentioned frequently in any kind of reading about the Maya during the Classic period. So the Classic period here, about 250 BC to 900 AD. By 900 AD, we see massive depopulation of the entire southern lowlands area, coupled with warfare, drought, starvation, health problems, and so forth. It doesn't mean everyone left by 900 AD, but it means that the large cities are no longer functioning as regional political centers. During the Classic period, particularly with the new technical advances we have in getting images through the rainforest, the SLAR that you have in the short read, or LIDAR, we are seeing that as many more buildings, roads, dams, walls, that sort of thing, ditches, on and on and on, and that it may have been home to 10 to 15 million people, and that might even be conservative in some of the centuries. Now, much of this is low-lying, swampy areas that really have very challenging health and survival conditions for people, and people don't prefer to live in these today, but the Maya had ways of making those quite productive. You do have another PowerPoint presentation in this unit talking about how the Maya converted low-lying swampy areas to the raised, drained field systems. Be sure that you go through that little by little. It's quite interesting. And again, part of the focus of this class is for you to really see these cultures not as odd, mysterious, or just for their artifacts or their architecture, but as very technically motivated and highly engineering skilled populations that were making things work for themselves. So again, that population figure is not just one particular city. Probably the largest that we know of was Tikal. It may have had as many as 50 to 75,000 population. But as you're remembering, because I'm sure, because I'm an optimist, that you've already looked at the Teotihuacan lesson and reading, that Teotihuacan was much larger, but again, a much more welcoming type of environment, not in the rainforest. So here for this particular slide, we'll just do it kind of a wide range of population, but for any urban center, going back again to the big theme of this, we're always going to have mobile groups of people that are coming in and out. Traders, people that are porters carrying things in and out, seasonal visitors that are coming on pilgrimage for festivities or religious observances, people in transition traveling through. At Teotihuacan, we know that there were permanent neighborhoods, which we just archaeologically call barrios. Here in the Maya area, we really don't see this for permanent population, but it doesn't mean they weren't there. It just means we haven't seen that they're living in different types of houses or burying their dead in a different way. So again, rainforest everywhere in the world, always limiting on potential of agriculture, climate, and human populations. Now here you can see the image of a very lovely classic Maya platform pyramid. They're really technically called platform pyramids, not pyramids, because pyramids are the shape of the Egyptian ones. And you can see that they go up in independent layers, kind of like a layer cake. They're frequently 9 or 13 layers tall if they're used for rituals and covering royal or elite burials. The building on the top will have one doorway, three, there might be a few with five. It's always an odd number. One or three are the most common. The extra area over the top in this particular building did originally have a with a stone or brick underlayment, and then plaster over the top that was painted, an image of a lord sitting on a throne. This was not for residents. They were doing very specific type of rituals inside those buildings where they were contacting and communicating with their deceased ancestors who were buried directly underneath the building. So this is a conduit for the breakthrough between the different levels of reality that we talked about earlier in the course. These are all ways facing either one more or two other platform pyramids, and then we'll have other types of buildings around them. The plazas nowadays, if you see one that's in a park, it is with grass, but these were originally kind of like our campus layout. They would have plaster drains and so forth, and these were for large groups or crowds of people to meet for certain kinds of things. The tall stone monuments there are stela. Sometimes people call them stela or stelae. Just kind of depends on who you work with and where you went to get your graduate degree, I think, and then with altars in the front. The stela are sometimes no longer decorated. They were probably plastered over the top and painted. They show images of lords and elites, sometimes also with wives or husbands, dressed in their public outfits for public recognition. Now, as a major part of this reading and lesson for us on the classic period and the urban growth of the urban state, and it works exactly the same in the post-classic and for everywhere else in the world, cities cannot feed themselves. Part of the city definition is that the buildings are very closely spaced, and that you have a lot of highly trained people that are doing organizational management, ritual or religious management. They are managing trade, transport, taxation, defense, safety, manufacturing of things. And so these are not places where you have a lot of open space where food can be grown. So these elites here must control those outlying areas where the food is grown to make sure that the food supply is every single day flowing into the city. So they are always politically attached to intensive agricultural systems. It's the same in the Middle East. It's the same in Africa, Southeast Asia, Europe, on and on and on. So again, as you've been learning, rainforest gives a really different type of potential, not only for building materials, but also for aesthetics. The Maya clearly were looking to make their platform pyramids high and narrow so that they could jut out over the top of whatever trees they had. There are far more trees in these areas today than there were while these cities were functioning. As you might guess, they cut down a lot of their forest, as we do. All rainforests are linked everywhere in the world with very poor soil fertility, so fertilizers and other types of growing techniques must be managed, and issues with flooding. So frequently buildings that people are living in or using publicly have to be raised up off the ground. So again, the term for Maya intensive agriculture in low-lying or swampy areas are called raised and drained field systems. This is not typically what rural people do for raising their own food or a little bit of extra food to take to market today in these regions. That's called swidden or slash and burn. That is not a high production type of field system, and it is not the type of agricultural system that the classic Maya were using during this particular period of time, and already using it in the formative period. The political organization of the classic Maya area was based on hereditary elites. lords that were linked to powerful ruling families. Much of the hieroglyphic inscriptions that we find in these urban centers and on the stela, altars, tombs, and so forth make it very, very clear that they were officially descendants of supernaturals and that they still were in contact with their relatives and family members that had moved on to the next world. Now, in Maya ritual system, people moved on to the underworld. There were several layers of it, and there were many rituals and activities that allowed them to actually communicate directly with these very powerful ancestors. Why would they want to do this? Because you would be asking very powerful members of alternate reality for assistance or information. You were asking them to make things go better and so forth. Maya lords could be biofemale. This is the only area of the New World where we know for sure that at times that the dominant political person in an urban society was a female. She might be the mother of a male child who is too young to actually hold that title, or she may be the dominant member of the family. In that case, we do actually have inscriptions that note that when a female who is the Lord gets married, her husband, who's generally coming from another city for alliances, takes her family last name. And that is pretty unique and very awesome, right? So the economy, again, they're paying taxes in. Elites are using what's coming in order to fund construction for events, rituals, safety, training of population members who are doing all kinds of different technical sorts of things, their own royal lifestyle, and then also whatever's left goes back to the general public in building and maintaining roads, field systems, hosting feasting events for rituals and so forth. Now, in your reading again, be sure that you are looking at some of these details in regards to where exactly the sites are, where the dominant rivers are that are like the highways of the ancient period, what are the dates, again, for this, and population numbers. Now, how do we have a better idea about where and how many and so many of the brand new things that we're learning? And one of these new techniques for recording where things were located is called LIDAR, which means light detection and rating. Light detection and ranging. Mounted onto airplanes that fly over, they have these remote sensing units that are looking for changes in density, and then when it bounces back up to the plane as it goes over, then these really complicated computer systems are looking for areas where things are denser, right? Where you have stone structures, where you have dense road beds and so forth. LIDAR techniques have made huge changes in what we understand about this region today. In this particular slide, you can take a little bit of a look at actually one of my favorites that's working in the field today for archaeology and advancing techniques for finding, locating, and evaluating sites without having to do it always on foot. And this is Albert Lynn. In order to watch this video, you will have to download the PowerPoint because when they're embedded in Canvas, they don't let the videos flow for you, but it's not real long, but it's really, really interesting. So again, major breakthrough with LIDAR, also with SLAR. That's mentioned in the two-page little reading about this. They believe recently that they may have definitively recognized more than 60,000 structures that are houses, palaces, government buildings, ball courts, highways, walls, moats, all kinds of different things that were in some cases already recognized with on foot evaluation, but sometimes not mapped real thoroughly. So One of the most revealing types of features that was found are these raised highways that were connecting urban centers and areas where they were going for the building material of stone, and also areas where they were recovering limestone that they were using to make stucco or plaster. Maya buildings in large cities were covered with a thick coating of plaster, which was painted and sometimes coated also in murals. Very few of the murals survive, but when we find them, they are spectacular. Since I have defined LiDAR several times in this presentation, you can pretty much guess that you're going to see a question where it asks you what LiDAR stands for. So just be sure you take a look at that in your notes. Now, what is it that we see? Now, from your readings, there is a goodly bit of reading about how we get information from looking at monuments, particularly those that are carved into stone or inscribed, but we also have a tremendous amount of text coming from murals, ceramics, and a number of other types of materials. Some of them are quite small, others are very, very large. The Maya loved to write on things. They labeled things, they named things. There's a lot of images of their books, although we have not found any books that can be read. It's clear that there were many, many of them. This particular image on this slide is actually unique. It shows a obviously not a natural rabbit, but a scribe, someone who knows how to write using a probably an animal bone tube with hair or fur at the end in order to be the brush. You can see the cover of the book is covered in spotted cat pelt or skin. This could be ocelot, it might be jaguar, and that the pages then are kind of attached in a screen fold, kind of like we do with baby books today. This is not a natural rabbit. You can see that he has on clothing and he knows how to write. But the other thing that's very interesting, if you take a look at the design on the ears, this is very specific in Maya iconography, and it indicates that the ears are sacrificial blades, that they're sharp knives that can be used to bloodlet. We have recovered beautiful ceramics that show some of this ink type drawing and how finely done this was, at least in royal centers. It's not always this fancy in smaller towns. To the left, you see a piece of shell that has hieroglyphic inscription there that tells us that it was used to put ink in. So they're looking for minerals, grinding them down into a powder, adding a little bit of liquid and using that for the ink. It's pretty much the same way in Egypt, in the Middle East, in South America. People discover how to do this early on. And then to the right, a very unusual pot. In this particular pot, the inscription around the edge, as you can see here, says that it was a pot for chocolate. Now, that was confirmed by a chemical test that was actually turned into the Nestle Corporation, who did confirm that it was for cacao. That cacao was probably not something that was sweetened, and certainly not with dairy products in it, right? They didn't have any source of milk other than for baby humans. Breast milk. So this would be another type of liquid and probably other flavorings to it. The handle on the pot is covered with a very rare pigment, blue. Not very many sources for the clay that would make a blue ink, so we don't see it very often. And then in a stripe that also says that the handle is depicting something covered with the cat skin. Now this lid though actually screws on, so they could have carried the pot by picking up the handle and the lid would have stayed on. So this is a screw top pot. Moving on with the concept of inscriptions, here is a building doorway at the site of Yaxchilan. Yaxchilan is on the Usumacinta River and is one of the largest and best investigated along that particular area. in the image to the left, you can see a horizontal line that shows a pair of individuals that are about the same size sitting next to each other, one with kind of a roundish collar and kind of a long dipping sleeve. That would be a female of very high rank. Right next to her in the middle, you can see the chest area of a male looking straight out with the chest coming straight out towards the observer. That would be the highest ranking male, probably a husband. And then over to the side, another seated individual. In front of this particular doorway, we've got some other things down below it, but we don't have time to learn every single thing. In front of this doorway is actually an image of a Maya royal queen. The long skirt that goes all the way down to the calves is the indicator of this. She is holding a small icon in her hand, which is associated with Maya royalty. We get even more information though from these painted vase-shaped cups. So they're called either polychrome vases or cylinder vases. In this particular one that I picked is just a totally different image. This shows a elite male dressed in the ball player outfit. And interestingly enough, in the Maya area, you can see that they wore on one knee a pad, so they had a knee pad, a really heavy duty abdominal protector. The Maya used very large, very heavy balls. You can see the ball to the far right is that big black blob. And then also a padding on one forearm. So apparently whether you were a lefty or a righty, you would learn which side you were going to do. The horizontal lines behind are a stairway, which is probably how they got the ball moving and bouncing down the area. But again, captioning here on these ceramics gives us more information about sometimes the people, the event, or perhaps the religious significance of some of these things that we're looking at. Now, Maya glyphs themselves, just like deciphering the inscriptions of any ancient culture, the people that can do this, this is called epigraphy, reading the writing. So when with a system like the Maya glyphs, and we also have Zapotec hieroglyphs and also Central Mexican hieroglyphs as well. They're not in the same system. They are not writing out things in exactly the same way. So it would be kind of like you thinking about the way that we use letters for English, Spanish, French, Italian versus Middle Eastern versus Japanese versus Chinese versus etc., etc. So in this case, in order to be an epigrapher, you must be able to speak the language, and we must know what language they were writing it in. Classic Maya hieroglyphs are written in a version of the Maya language that's most similar to one of the still spoken versions of Maya today, which is Yucatec. When we decipher Maya glyphs, and there are quite a few people globally who can do this and do work on this as their primary specialty, what we have found is that their scribes were trained specifically as a part of courtly life. And most of them are writing down dates for events like marriage, birth, alliances, battlefield, successes, sacrifices of high-ranking captives, and so forth. They talk about the roles of the royal family in warfare, ritual, personal ties to agriculture, to auto-sacrifice, which means drawing fluids from yourself or harming yourself in order to make the offering of something valuable to the supernatural world. There's nothing that we have that talks about children, the middle class, slaves, everyday life, or so forth. This is really very, very much related to courtly life. That's why there are so many beautiful images that go with the hieroglyphic inscription, because to be honest, most people couldn't read the inscription. In this particular embedded video here, again, you'd have to download it to see it, not very long, but it does talk about one of these beautifully preserved murals from a classic Maya period that you could take a look at. This one from a site called Shultun. The best preserved large-scale murals that we have from the classic period is the site of Calakmul, which is in the northern Pitan, not super far from the site of Tikal. We looked at this a little bit earlier on in the course when I was mentioning that markets are a required functional part of defining Mesoamerica because they are part of urbanism, and the neighbors further north of the Maya of Mesoamerica and further south actually were not urbanized. So in the left image here, we can see a hieroglyphs here that are showing a higher ranking female in her long very, very thin garment because it's super hot and humid, loading up a much lower ranking female with a really heavy ceramic jar. There's the individual on the far right wearing a sort of a plaid looking or checked garment around the waist is a male. He is drinking something out of that particular container, and the male to the far left is actually using a container that has essentially masa in it, and that is what the text says. So the drink that's being consumed on the far side would be atole, which is kind of a corn masa drink for these. So in this case, it is indicating products and vendors. And you can see the colors are very, very good. These were almost life size. So we're getting more information here from looking at these people, like costuming, jewelry, the shape of the containers, colors, how they're cutting their hair. Again, I mentioned earlier in the class, they really don't have different haircuts for males and females in Maya culture. But we do see a big difference in the type of ornaments worn in the ears. Here you can see something here that's kind of dangling versus hers that comes out straight in this giant heavy earplug, and here's his does as well. These are worn by higher ranking or more notable people as far as we can tell. The polychrome or painted vases show tons of scenes of courtly life. We do believe these were made to give as gifts or for use at certain types of rituals. In the left, we see a lord sitting on the throne. When it's an indoor scene, the lords do not have as much clothing on and are typically barefoot. Most of the people in the scenes are also barefoot. We see that individuals wore body paint, different types of decorated fabric garments and so forth. And then again on this one, there's quite a bit of text here. To the right, we see a ritual in action, in progress. The individual on that one to the third person over to the left has one foot flat on the ground and the other with the knee up with the toe, and that is indicating a dance type posture. That tipped item that's closer to the feet is probably a mirror, and you can see that the person is wearing a really large headdress with some sort of supernatural face on it. Individual in the center is there holding a number of little other equipments and an attendant to a large tied cloth bundle, as is another individual over that's wearing a big hip cloth with a jaguar head to the back. These would be very high-ranking individuals. The drawing here is different from the drawn one to the photo of the monument. They are actually two different scenes. But the one with the blue arrow pointing down, yet another lord in celebration wearing the water lily item prominently displayed in the headdress. And as you can see behind it, a really large fish tail with a lot of feathers coming out. So again, his role with managing and distributing food, which is really a form of wealth, right? For these. So the royal couples, in this case, you can see Maya females are wearing long skirts, sometimes with a large garment over the top of the shoulder if they are elites, sometimes with nothing worn over the shoulders. Short skirts, bio males, hip cloth, bio males. Now, does my hieroglyphic writing tell us everything as you're reading in your textbook? No. Most of it has not lasted. We have very little wooden items left. The few that we have do have inscriptions on them, so it makes us very bummed out that we won't be able to recover that type of text and information. Many wall murals are not preserved either. It's really pretty rare that we have murals, and so the big murals showing the market scene are spectacular at Colombo. And generally, again, they're very interested in talking about their own elite concerns, but not really anything about other social classes. Okay, so here as we're wrapping up, just a very nice little cartoon. Again, um, and the reason that I picked this one, not only because it makes me laugh, but again, this constant meme that everything about Maya culture was mysterious. And that just really isn't technically correct anymore. We really know much more about this culture than any other in Mesoamerica. Why? Because there were so many cities. Why? Because they wrote things all over their buildings, their ceramics, the walls of their tombs, on their personal belongings. Things are labeled. They're very, very serious about even showing you what kind of knot they used to tie their jewelry on, and so on and so forth. So the Maya are not as mysterious as perhaps some of the other smaller scale cultures where we have some archaeological remains, but we don't have as much text.